There is breaking news as we come on the air this evening. A top CDC panel changing its vaccine guidance just as cases surge again. Experts are now saying people should not get the Johnson & Johnson shot if other options are available. Why they're taking this major step as travel plans, Broadway shows, holiday parties all across the country are getting canceled. And we're on the ground and in the air in Kentucky, where heavy rain threatens tornado recovery efforts this weekend. We'll get an up-close look at how the National Guard is stepping in to help survivors, including what all that damage looks like from the sky. The state's wrapping its case against Kim Potter, that's the Minnesota police officer who shot and killed Daunte Wright. So now the big question is, will she take the stand in her own defense? At this hour, it seems so. Why experts think that's a risky move. Plus, it's something out of a James Bond movie, a ring of spies for hire, trying to target journalists, politicians, you name it, through social media. We'll give you an exclusive look at this new threat in tonight's original. And the boss is making bank. Bruce Springsteen reportedly selling off his entire music library for a record-breaking $500 million. Why some of music's biggest stars think now's the time to give up the rights to their hit songs. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Welker, in tonight for Hallie Jackson. We begin with a major recommendation by a CDC panel. People should not get the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine when the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna shots are available. That panel spent nearly 4 hours discussing a rare blood clot risk linked to J&J's vaccine. All of this happening while the president and vice president are meeting with the White House COVID-19 response team about a horrible new prediction this country is facing. The CDC says by Christmas Day, we could see 1.3 million new COVID cases. And by the first week of the new year, we could see more than 15,000 deaths per week. There is just so much to discuss about the pandemic tonight. But first, we do want to get to Dr. John Torres and the latest from this CDC panel. Dr. Torres, really good to see you. Thank you for being with us on a big evening. The CDC advisory panel is saying that these other vaccines are safer than J&J. Why did the panel make this recommendation? And frankly, what does it mean?
And Kristen, you're right. They just made that recommendation. Now that recommendation goes to Dr. Walensky, the head of the CDC, to decide what she wants to do, if she wants to sign off on it or alter it to any extent. But essentially what they said was, if you have Pfizer and Moderna available, then you should take Pfizer and Moderna. But that does not take Johnson & Johnson off the table, because if that's the only one you can get, they're saying go ahead and get that, because that is going to give you some protection. And we know the risks are low, but the risks are there for that bleeding condition with Johnson & Johnson, especially for women in that particular middle age group type situation. But what some of the participants in that advisory panel said is, we are looking at the risk benefit, and with Pfizer and Moderna, we know the risk benefit. The benefits completely outweigh the risks. With Johnson & Johnson, we're not quite as sure, and that's why we're making this recommendation, Kristen.
Can we just follow up on that point you just made? Why they made this recommendation? Concerns about the fact that 9 women died in the wake of taking that booster, or that vaccine, I should say. Talk about what happened in those cases, and they're still incredibly rare, right?
They are still incredibly rare, but what happened is, especially for middle-aged women, they found that in those very rare instances, they can have a bleeding disorder that causes them to bleed, particularly in their brain, and in some cases it proved fatal. But again, these are very rare cases, but they're saying, coupling that with the fact that the effectiveness of Johnson & Johnson had dropped, especially with the Omicron variant, that they were concerned that it wasn't as effective and it had that little bit of risk with it. And so why not go with the ones that we know are more effective and lower risk, particularly for this age group? And we did not know going in if they were going to restrict it to certain age groups, certain genders. But in this case, they just said, basically, if you can get Pfizer and Moderna, go ahead and get that. If Johnson & Johnson's the only one available, or in some areas it might be the only one available, go ahead and get that, because you still want that protection from the COVID virus.
So, Dr. Torres, I think the big question on a lot of people's minds tonight, what should you do if you got the J&J vaccine? Is there anything you need to do differently? Obviously, the administration's still saying get a booster shot, but any action you should be taking?
And that's the main thing. Just get a booster shot. With Johnson & Johnson, it's 2 months after getting that Johnson & Johnson vaccine. With the other vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, it's 6 months after getting fully vaccinated. And so go ahead and get the booster. But if you have it and you're concerned about some of these bleeding disorders or anything else, rest assured, take a deep breath, especially if you've had it for more than a few weeks. You are essentially out of the woods from that type of condition. And so just rest assured that it is effective to a certain extent. It is helping you out to a certain extent. But getting that booster is going to be extremely important going forward, not just with Johnson & Johnson, but with the other vaccines as well.
Well, Dr. Torres, I don't think I have to tell you this, but one of the big hurdles to fighting COVID, if you talk to health officials, if you talk to the Biden administration, is vaccine hesitancy. Johnson & Johnson was an answer to that for some people, an option for people who lived in rural areas, who had reservations about getting the vaccine. How does this potentially complicate that problem and that problem of addressing vaccine hesitancy?
And I think, Kristen, unfortunately, you're bringing up a great point, and it is going to contribute to that problem a little bit more. And I think the message has to get out there saying, hey, this is still a vaccine. In most cases is safe, can be effective at least to a certain amount. But again, looking at the other ones, the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, that's the way you want to go if you have not gotten any vaccines at this point. When it comes to booster shots, Pfizer and Moderna are the ones that people typically get, and go ahead and continue to get that. Remember, though, it still has to go to the CDC. Dr. Walensky still has to sign off and decide what she wants to do with that and where she wants to go with it, but more than likely she's going to follow their advice.
What's the timeline on that, Dr. Torres, before we get that final decision?
The timeline could be any time from tonight for the next couple of weeks. It just depends on how much she wants to go into data, how much she wants to talk to the advisors to get more information, and when she wants to decide to go ahead and sign off on that.
One of the panel members said something that caught our attention that we thought was really interesting. I'm just going to read this to you. This is from Pablo Sanchez, a pediatrics professor at Ohio State University. He said he had grave concerns about J&J, saying, quote, I just cannot recommend a vaccine that is associated with a condition that may lead to death. What should people take away from that strong language, Dr. Torres?
And I think what people should take away is the context behind it, the fact that we do have these other vaccines that are available, the Pfizer-Moderna vaccine, that don't have that risk. They have other risks with them as well. Those are very rare circumstances. But in this case, it's that risk of that bleeding that they were concerned about. And so that's why they went ahead with this. And again, remember, they didn't take Johnson & Johnson off the table. They just said if Pfizer-Moderna happen to be on the table as well, edge towards those. Johnson & Johnson only if that's the only one available.
And here we are facing another holiday. And Dr. Torres, I think a lot of people feel like we are taking steps backwards because of the Omicron variant, because of Delta. A lot of things now getting canceled, from Broadway shows to professional games, even Christmas parties. What does all of this mean? Where are we in this battle? And are you concerned that things could start to close down again?
You know, Kristen, this is not unexpected. We knew that these cases would start to go up after the holidays, Thanksgiving, people got together. We knew there'd be rise in cases. On top of that, people are going back into the hospital for conditions or operations or procedures that they had been waiting on. And so that's inundating the hospitals as well. And that's why they're also being overwhelmed. But the thing you have to remember is we have more tools now than we did a year ago. I didn't get my vaccine till January, February timeframe. People have gotten vaccinated now. We know more about masks and how effective they can be. Testing is out there. And so we do think numbers are going to go high, but we think we're also doing the right things and saying, let's shut things down. Let's keep things under control as best we can to keep it under control. So we're not back at those 300,000 cases. We're not back at those 2,000 to 3,000 hospital deaths a day, those hospitalizations a day. We're not back in that situation.
That is really important context. Dr. Torres, thank you so much for joining us and helping us understand some really complicated information. Appreciate it. We now want to get to Kelly O'Donnell at the White House with the other part of this story. The president just wrapping up the meeting with his COVID-19 response team. And Kelly, the president doubling down, pushing people to get vaccinated, to get their booster shots. What can you tell us about what just unfolded in the West Wing?
Well, Kristen, I think he's wrapped up the portion where he allows us to come in, but the meeting itself may be continuing with about a half dozen of his top medical COVID advisors in the Roosevelt room. But he allowed the TV pool and the pool journalists to come in, and he spoke for a couple of minutes, and he talked about the obvious concerns that you were just discussing with Dr. Torres. And he didn't want to take any questions, he said, but he had a message for the American people, encouraging them to get their vaccines if they have not already done so, and to get boosted, emphasizing that. He also stressed that it is likely that the Omicron variant will continue to spread, and that it's already spreading, but it will likely grow higher and spike. And he said for those who are unvaccinated, he had a very dire warning of a winter of death and severe illness. But for others who are vaccinated, encouraging them to get boosted, to do the steps of mitigation, like wearing masks indoors and taking the proper steps, that there are tools available to keep themselves and their families safe. But giving people kind of a clear-eyed warning that Omicron, as this new variant that we're dealing with, is likely to be a bigger part of the picture. And in many ways, Kristen, that's why the president had another meeting with his team in person here at the White House. One of the pool reporters noted that the pool was kept at a greater distance than we sometimes are in what, as you know, is a fairly small room in the West Wing. That might be one of the steps even that the White House is taking to give a little protection to the president and vice president in attendance there. The president said the full COVID team would brief tomorrow with new information with all of these scientific developments, the things you were just discussing with Dr. Torres. One of the members of the team also mentioned that the president really wants to emphasize that the science is telling them so far that Omicron does not suggest, based on what Dr. Fauci and the team have been telling him, that the vaccines themselves need to be tweaked to address Omicron, so that the vaccines that Dr. Torres was just talking about, the Pfizer and Moderna and the boosters associated with that, do the job on Omicron, so that is a bit of peace of mind. But they're still examining that to see what the effect will be over time. But really, it's a warning about expecting there will be more cases, more breakthrough cases, and encouraging people to do what they need to do to get vaccinated. The White House says about 1 million vaccine boosters a day. They'd like to see that to be a greater number, but they're pleased with that number. They think that's one of the largest vaccine turnouts around the world in terms of boosters. And even though we're behind some other countries for full vaccination, they're hoping that that message is getting through, and that especially as people are considering their holiday plans and time with family, that they're getting that message that doing a booster is another way to protect themselves. So that's sort of what we're hearing today. We don't have any reaction yet from the White House. We had a chance to ask Karine Jean-Pierre, who was doing the briefing today, about the J&J development. She didn't have any specifics on that yet, waiting for Dr. Walensky to weigh in, as we expect after she reviews the data and considers the panel's recommendation on that. Kristen?
And Kelly, you're covering a lot of different breaking news angles there, and we appreciate your getting all of that to us. Just let me follow up with you very quickly on something that I was talking about with Dr. Torres, which is this issue of vaccine hesitancy. It is one of the biggest hurdles that the administration is facing right now toward getting people vaccinated, toward having people listen to the president's message. And I noted that you talked about this strong language that he is using. Is that part of the strategy to deal with vaccine hesitancy?
Well, in one way, we have heard the president and all of the people in the administration who've been working on this talk about how they have had 3 safe vaccines. So any question about J&J certainly is a challenge in that area. Then when you add something like Omicron and you talk about the fact that it spreads more quickly, it may not be more serious in terms of the virus itself in the serious illness effect and death rates and so forth. The science is still being determined on that. But it is another scare for many people. And so by emphasizing the need for boosters, they're trying to say that's the best tool available now, and that it's readily available with 80,000 sites around the country for free boosters. But hesitancy has been an issue. They've tried to use mandates in the federal workforce and in the private sector. We've seen how that has increased participation in vaccines, but there are still pockets where people are refusing to get vaccinated, and they know that for those who are most unwilling to be vaccinated, that's a very tough sell, and they have more work to do. Kristen?
Kelly O'Donnell at the White House, where, as you rightfully noted, the president continues to meet with his COVID-19 team. Kelly, we really appreciate it, bringing us all of that breaking news and all of those developments.
Good to be with you.
Well, shifting gears now, there is another round of cleanup going on in the Midwest after a second wave of dangerous winter storms blew through several states last night. Here's a look at some of the damage we are seeing today. People woke up to more broken buildings, overturned trucks, closed highways. Now, at least one person died in Iowa. Police say the person was traveling during the severe weather. The storms were historic in Minnesota. For the first time, the state had a tornado warning in December. That doesn't usually happen, folks. And those new storms happened as Kentucky tries to recover after last weekend's tornadoes. Hundreds of National Guard troops are in the state to help the thousands who still have no electricity or water. The number of people dead is holding at 89, with 75 in Kentucky alone. And today, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear said the number of people reported missing there is now down to 16. The governor says the healing process is just beginning.
We are hurting. We're still hurting. And it continues to be very painful. But we are not broken.
I now want to go to Gabe Gutierrez, who has been traveling with the National Guard today. So, Gabe, obviously a very emotional governor there, Andy Beshear, who has continued to provide these updates throughout this crisis for his state. Talk to me about what you saw today with the National Guard. How are they helping folks start to put the pieces back together there?
Well, hi there, Kristen. Well, a couple of things. First, I want to get to some breaking news, is that there has been another death in Kentucky. A 13-year-old girl who had been missing since the storms on Friday has now, unfortunately, been found dead. And this effort continues to try and search for the missing. But we also got some news today, Kristen, from the governor in terms of those who were unaccounted for. You'll know that over the last couple of days, Governor Beshear has been saying that more than 100 people were accounted for. Today, he said that that number has dropped dramatically to 16. So 16 people still unaccounted for. Kristen, I want to step out of the way and show the damage here, because I don't think you can see these pictures enough. There's a tendency, once these disasters, once the aftermath continues for several days, that we don't, the images seem to blur together. This is another neighborhood. I spoke to you, yesterday and over the past several days. This is yet another neighborhood that is obliterated, Kristen. And today we saw an incredible view from overhead. The National Guard took us along as they surveyed the damage. There are about 700 National Guard members of Air and Army National Guard now on the ground here in Kentucky, clearing debris, searching for the missing, and even helping local law enforcement protect against looters, which they've already gotten several reports of that so far. So, Kristen, this is an ongoing effort here in Kentucky. Of course, the breaking news, sadly, another person has been found dead, a 13-year-old girl in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Kristen?
It's just absolutely devastating news, Gabe, on top of so much there in that community. And you're absolutely right. We can't see the damage and the devastation too much. And I think seeing it from the air really gives you a sense of just how expansive the damage has been there for that community. And now they are bracing for more bad weather, heavy rain in the forecast. Talk to me about how they're preparing for this, Gabe.
Well, Kristen, actually, the heavy rain actually came already earlier this afternoon. More of it is expected over the coming days. Sort of insult to injury, local officials say, considering that these communities have gone through so much. They're expecting heavy wind, heavy rain. Thankfully, no severe weather, no more tornadoes are expected in this area. But again, they're dealing with rain. Now, there are many displaced residents, as you know, the people that used to live in the homes behind me. They are being asked to go to temporary shelters that have been set up at state parks. Local officials say that anyone that needs shelter can go to these state parks. And again, the resources from the National Guard are here distributing supplies in addition to their other efforts, clearing out debris. But this is going to be a long recovery, Kristen. We're talking, not just months, but years. And in that aerial tour, again, we saw this is potentially a historic tornado. It was at one point, the National Weather Service is still surveying this damage, but the biggest tornado, that monster tornado that was on the ground for more than 2 hours at one point, it has been classified as an EF4 tornado, and that has winds of up to 190 miles an hour. That's an initial assessment, though, as a possibility it could be upgraded eventually to an EF5. But incredible, I spoke with the general who leads the National Guard, and he told me that, you see large tornadoes, but never on the ground, or very rarely on the ground for that long. It could potentially be the longest track tornado in American history if, as the National Weather Service continues to assess that damage, Kristen.
Just impossible to think about a tornado that strong, 190 mile per hour winds. Gabe Gutierrez, we appreciate your joining us in another day of just tremendous reporting there on the ground and in the air. Thank you. Well, there is big news today in the Kim Potter trial. Potter is expected to testify tomorrow in her own defense. She is the former Brooklyn Center police officer who mistook her gun for a taser, she says, and shot and killed Daunte Wright during a traffic stop. The defense today calling witnesses that testified on behalf of Potter's character and whether her use of force was justified. Now, yesterday, as a reminder, the prosecution's witness saying the use of her gun was excessive and inappropriate because Wright was not a threat to the officers on scene, including Sergeant Johnson, who reached into Wright's car to prevent him from driving away. But today, a witness for the defense countering that argument. Take a listen.
An officer half in and half out of a vehicle that is about to be put into drive with the door open would certainly meet that standard of being in immediate danger of death or serious physical injury.
Okay. So an officer seeing that could shoot?
It would meet that standard, and an officer could shoot, yes, sir.
All right. Well, joining me now is Shaq Brewster, who's been covering this trial from the beginning. He's in Minneapolis. So, Shaq, let's just talk about this because Potter, based on your reporting, is expected to testify tomorrow in her own defense. This could always be seen as a risky move. Talk to me about the defense's strategy here.
Well, throughout this trial, we've really been hearing the witnesses that have come up and testified on both sides, both the prosecution and the defense. They've been talking about what they think Potter saw, what they think she was believing, what they believe she was thinking when she acted in a certain way. This is an opportunity for Potter to come up and speak for herself, to explain why she mistook, in her words, her taser for, or her firearm for her taser, or why she mistook her taser for a firearm and ended up shooting Daunte Wright, and explain the risks and concerns that she had. You know, we heard a lot of conversation about the sergeant that was on the passenger side of the vehicle and how there was concern that he could have been dragged had she let Daunte Wright back in the vehicle and let him take off after that interaction. Well, this is an opportunity for us to hear for herself what she has to say and what she was thinking during this interaction. And it's a crucial moment that will allow the jurors to hear directly from her.
You're right. It is going to be a crucial moment, Shaq. There is no doubt about that. Well, let's talk about what happened in court today. The defense really went after the prosecution's argument that the use of force was inappropriate. Talk to us about how they laid out their case and what was your big takeaway?
Well, they were really trying to underscore through their witnesses. I should start off by saying the defense, their role is to poke holes in the case that the prosecution has been making over the past week. And today they tried to poke holes by using the former police chief of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, who said that the action that Potter took was reasonable, that it was justified based on not only the law, but based on the policies and practices of that police department. We also heard from a use of force expert who said he reviewed the entire case and that based on his review, the actions that she took were justified. And you had both of them say that despite her using her firearm, and she said she intended to use her taser, that even if she intended to use her firearm, that would have been justified. So the big concept was that you had so many members of law enforcement, you had so many experts on the defense side now come up and contradict what we've been hearing the past week from the prosecution. That is the job of the defense. That is their role here. But now you really have dueling evidence that the jury will have to listen to.
All right, Shaq Brewster, you're going to have a very busy day tomorrow. Thank you so much, my friend. Great to see you.
You got it.
The Jacksonville Jaguars have fired their head coach before the season is even over. So why did he get the job in the first place? Well, our Vaughn Hilliard brings us those details. That's next. He is one of college football's winningest coaches, and now, after just 13 games in the pros, he's out of a job. We're talking about Urban Meyer, fired during the season by the Jacksonville Jaguars after a tenure that had more unflattering off-the-field moments than wins. Jaguars owner Shahid Khan said an immediate change is, quote, imperative for everyone. Khan also said of Meyer, regaining our trust and respect was essential. Regrettably, it did not happen. So the final straw appearing to be a report from the Tampa Bay Times from former Jags kicker Josh Lambo. He says Meyer kicked him on the practice field. The now ex-head coach denies those allegations. We haven't heard anything from the NFL just yet about Lambo's claims. With all of that, I want to bring in Vaughn Hilliard for more on this. So, Vaughn, let me just set the scene here. for folks who are watching, right? This is about Lambeau issuing this latest blow after what has really been a tumultuous tenure for Meyer. Let's pull up the timeline that shows some of those moments. One of his assistant coaches had to resign after accusations of racism and bullying. He had an embarrassing video surface of him with a college-aged girl, despite the fact that he's married. And there are multiple reports of how he mistreated staffers and players. And by the way, and this is an important by the way, the Jaguars are only 2-11. So a lot of the Jaguars and fans are asking what took them so long to make this decision.
Kristen, I like how you say, by the way, they're 2-11. That is not a stunning winning percentage,
no,
let alone in your first year. And this was big because over the last offseason, they actually drafted the top #1 pick, Trevor Lawrence, a quarterback who they had high hopes for. But at the same time, they brought in Urban Meyer to take this team to another level, signing him to a multi-year contract. And you ask, why did it take so long? Well, I think that's the question that we will await from this organization, because you mentioned this case in which Josh Lambeau, a now former kicker for the team, claims that the coach not only called him derogatory names, but kicked him hard. And he said it wasn't sort of a, okay, go and make the kicks out there, you know, young man. It was an aggressive kick. And he said that now that he's no longer a part of the team, he felt it was his duty to speak up on behalf of the organization and the players that are still there. Because just this last weekend, after yet another loss for this team here, Coach Meyer, to reporters after the game, said that he was frustrated by reports of turmoil within the locker room and said that he would get rid of anybody who leaked any such stories. Well, it took a former player to come forward and make this allegation against him, and ultimately at 1 a.m. this morning led to his termination. Can you give us a sense, what's the reaction been? You know, this is a coach who had a more than 85% winning percentage at the college level over the course of more than 2 decades in the game here. He won 3 college football national championships, yet this was his first crack at the NFL here. And yet at the same time, this is a coach who had run-ins. Of course, not only this year, he actually hired a former college coach who was let go by the University of Iowa just earlier this year after multiple players alleged racist behavior in racist language from that coach. And he ultimately hired him on. But after 1 day of being on the job, ultimately that coach resigned. But you got to go back also to even 2018, back when he was the coach over at Ohio State University. He was actually suspended for 3 games after knowing for what was believed to be several years that one of his assistant coaches engaged in domestic abuse, and yet didn't pursue it very intentionally within the organization, and ultimately led to his suspension. This is a coach who now is yet again looking for another job. The question is, will he get that chance?
That's
Kristen?
a good question. It's a very good question. I think a lot of people who are familiar with his career want to know, how did this get so bad so quickly?
Yeah, this is a situation here in which you go 2-11. It only heightens the attention on this coach here. The question, though, comes back to these contracts that these coaches face. You know, you're talking about multi-million-dollar deal for multi-years. And, you know, there's also the difference between college players and NFL players. College players, they're younger. And to usually, you know, these coaches are able to be a little bit more impressionable on them. And yet, when it comes to an NFL, you hear Josh Lambeau speak that he was not going to be talked to that way. And he said to never have that he expected to never be spoken that way again. Of course, that's where it comes to the head. You're dealing with adults in the NFL.
Well, the sports world and fans are abuzz about this story, so we really appreciate your bringing it to us and breaking it down. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you. Great to see you as always.
Thanks, Kristen. You too.
Well, a terrifying scene in the Dominican Republic after a Florida-bound plane crashed. All 9 people on board died, including a popular music producer. That's coming up in the 5 Things. Plus, the last of the child tax credit payments are out, and there are growing calls to extend the benefit for families as we head into the new year. But will the government do anything about it? That's the question. We'll talk about it after the break. Stay with us. The remaining missionaries that were kidnapped by a gang in Haiti have finally been released. We've got an update on how they're doing in just a bit. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a Puerto Rican music producer known as Flola Movie and 8 others died in a plane crash in the Dominican Republic on Wednesday. It happened minutes after the small plane took off for Florida. Flola Movie's partner and 4-year-old son were also reportedly killed. No word yet on what caused that crash. Number 2, 5 school children died and 4 others were hurt in Australia after wind lifted the bouncy castle they were in and they fell roughly 30 feet to the ground. The bouncy castle was part of an elementary school's end-of-year celebrations. And number 3, nearly 100,000 people in the Philippines have fled their homes because of Typhoon Rai. The storm slammed into the southeastern Philippines Thursday, causing power outages and flooding in some areas. Number 4, the U.S. Navy says it rescued 5 Iranians suspected of smuggling drugs after they apparently set fire to the stash they had on their boat. Now, this happened off the coast of Oman. Sailors say they recovered more than $14 million worth of drugs, but they think that's only half of all the drugs that were on board. And number 5, President Biden awarded the Medal of Honor to 3 soldiers who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. The country's highest military honor went to Master Sergeant Earl Plumley, Sergeant First Class Christopher Solis, and Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash. Solis and Cash were honored posthumously. The White House says Cash is the first black soldier to receive the Medal of Honor for military actions since Vietnam. Well, with the holiday shopping season in full swing and prices rising at the store and gas station, many families are already worried about how they're going to pay the bills. And now they're likely to lose their monthly child tax credit payment enhancement. The IRS issued that last payment yesterday, unless Congress extends it by passing the president's Build Back Better Act, which isn't likely to happen by the new year, folks. The credit gave $300 a month to working families with children under 6 and $250 a month for children between 6 and 17. Joining me now to break this all down is Hallie Vitale, who has been all over the halls of Congress working her sources on this one. So, Hallie, it's so good to see you. Let's talk about the roadblocks here. Democrats saying they just don't have the votes to pass this. And, of course, the key holdout, Senator Manchin. So talk to us about where this stands right now and what these families are going to do without these enhanced child tax credits.
Yeah, Kristen, glad I wore my comfortable shoes today because we have been all over the halls of Congress trying to talk with senators about what the path forward is for Build Back Better. And the reality here on the ground is that it's probably not happening by the end of this year. What that means politically is that they just get to try again next year. But what it means from a tangible perspective is that those American families who had been relying on the checks that were coming from the child tax credit, they got their last one yesterday, and it doesn't look like they're going to be getting another one until and if Congress finds a way to extend this child tax credit. There is the option to not do it through the Build Back Better package and instead do it as a standalone bill, but there is not enough bipartisan appetite for that, and so that leaves these families in the lurch. They were getting these checks, but they're not going to be anymore.
Talk a little bit about what the Plan Bs might look like. Hallie, is there a potential short-term fix here? I know I've been talking to folks at the White House who say even that gets very difficult.
Exactly. And the White House did rule that out just a little while ago in their press briefing, doing something that's standalone on the child tax credit. I was just in a briefing with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He was asked about if there's any appetite within his caucus to move forward with Democrats on a child tax credit extension. He put that to bed as well. So it doesn't look like there's any kind of short-term fix here because they were going to do it as part of Build Back Better. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer put that December Christmas deadline on getting that big package done. And that's not going to happen.
Well, the focus now is on voting rights. I've been talking to my sources at the White House who say it's going to be just as difficult to get something done on voting rights. What is the level of optimism there, Hallie? The folks you're talking to on Capitol Hill, do they think this is realistic?
Absolutely, Kristen. It's one intractable issue to another intractable issue. Both Build Back Better and the Voting Rights Act are kind of running into the same problems here. There's not consensus among all Democrats, and so even moving beyond that becomes difficult because on Build Back Better, it's Senator Joe Manchin, and on voting rights, it's Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Both of them in their own ways have expressed displeasure and concern about changing the rules that would allow Democrats to move forward by a simple majority on voting rights. There is urgency behind this. We know the White House, the president and the vice president held a Zoom call today with several key senators who have been working on this issue. All of those senators who I talked to today said that there was great urgency on that call, but the urgency is now running directly on a collision course with the reality on the ground here, which is that there is no strategic path forward on this. And we did think that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer was going to pivot from Build Back Better to voting rights, but he's pivoting into nothing because there is no strategy for actually how to get it done.
Yeah, and we know a lot of civil rights leaders feel frustrated as well. This was a key campaign promise of candidate Biden, so they want to see action on voting rights. A lot of pressure on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. Hallie Vitale, thanks so much. It's great to see you. I know you'll have a busy couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the remaining 12 missionaries who had been held captive by a Haitian gang for over 2 months are now free. The Ohio missionary group Christian Aid Ministries announced it today, saying, "Join us in praising God that all 17 of our loved ones are now safe." Haiti's national police spokesman confirmed their release to NBC News without saying exactly where the freed hostages are now or whether the $17 million the gang was demanding was paid. Since being kidnapped back in October, their releases have come in waves. 2 were freed in November, you may recall, then another 3 earlier this month. And Morgan Chesky has been tracking all of the twists and turns and developments. Morgan, thanks for joining us. So Haitian officials are saying the group's leader was demanding $1 million per hostage, a total of $17 million. We know that goes against U.S. policy to pay that. But what more do we know about how they were found and the condition they were in?
Yeah, Kristen, great question. And unfortunately, there are more questions than answers right now. According to Haitian radio stations and Haitian police, this group of the last remaining 12 hostages were allegedly found by townspeople in a community about an hour north of Port-au-Prince on a remote hillside that locals call Goat Mountain. And it was at that location that these sources are saying that they were apparently dropped off by members of the 400 Mawozo gang. That is the group believed to be responsible in this kidnapping that initially kidnapped 17 of those missionaries when they were returning from a rural orphanage that they travel to often and coming back to their base in a suburb of Port-au-Prince. So as you mentioned right now, we do know they're safe. We don't know exactly where they are, but according to that statement that was released by the Christian Aid Ministries based in Ohio, they did confirm the fact that those last remaining 12 missionaries are at this moment safe and sound. And we do know within this group of 17, Kristen, that there were at least several children here. Very fortunate news for that group. Kristen?
Yeah, what a massive relief that they are safe. Morgan, let me just talk to you broadly. Haiti has one of the highest kidnapping rates in the world. How involved was the Biden administration in the recovery efforts in this instance? Obviously, it's a big concern broadly for the administration.
No doubt. They, of course, are staying tight-lipped on their specific involvement regarding these last 12 missionaries. At least we haven't heard from the White House just yet. We do know that about a month or so ago, in response to the initial kidnapping, the Biden administration said that we're deploying significant resources to take care of this. They wouldn't specify as to what those were. We also know that as it stands right now, with the recovery of these 12 missionaries, the Biden administration still encouraging any American who is still in the country of Haiti to please consider leaving because of exactly what you mentioned, the increased rates of kidnappings, of gang activities that as of right now have left that island nation not safe.
Well,
Kristen?
And that's not the only issue. Haiti has had a really hard year, Morgan, including just this week, at least 75 people killed in a gas explosion. How is the country dealing with all of these challenges at once?
Well, I mean, it really is kind of a worst-case scenario going on in that country, considering the political issues that have been taking place there and the natural disasters as well, not to mention, most recently, that explosion. It's on unsteady footing. There are discussions of potential aid packages going to that country, ways to help out. But as of right now, again, it's deemed too unsafe for any American currently living there. There was a Canadian citizen that was also in that missionary group as well, so they will now be headed home sooner than later, hopefully. And Canada also echoing American sentiment and urging any Canadian citizens in the island nation of Haiti to please leave. Kristen?
All right, great reporting. There's just so much relief that those 12 missionaries are now freed. Morgan, thank you for that. Well, it's a case that shook the NHL, but the Chicago Blackhawks and a former player who said that he was sexually assaulted by an assistant coach have reached a settlement. Those details are coming up in The Local. And a new report out today about spies for hire on social media platforms. We're going to tell you who they're allegedly targeting next in The Original. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done that for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Midwest bureau, the Chicago Blackhawks and a former player have settled a sexual assault lawsuit. Kyle Beach alleged an assistant coach sexually assaulted him in 2010. He also claimed the Blackhawks didn't properly investigate the accusations. The settlement is confidential, but the hockey team's attorney says they hope the settlement gives Beach peace and closure. Our LA bureau is telling us record-breaking rainfall in Southern California caused crashes, evacuations, and even river rescues. The Santa Ana riverbed is usually dry, but it flooded to the point that 9 people and 2 dogs had to be rescued. Officials say there were more than 300 crashes in LA County because of the rain as well. And from our Northeast Bureau, New York City will see a black woman lead the NYPD for the first time ever. Mayor-elect Eric Adams named Keishant Sewell as the next commissioner for the country's largest police department. She will start the new job on January 1st and says she is ready to get to work. Well, now we want to bring you today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. Meta, Facebook's parent company, has a new report out today saying threats from what it calls cyber mercenaries go beyond what they had originally thought. Now, according to Meta, global spies for hire, that's right, spies for hire, used its platforms to target journalists, activists, politicians, and others, with bad actors saying intrusive software tools and surveillance services indiscriminately to any customer, regardless of who they target. Meta says it's trying to crack down on some of the companies involved and is sharing its findings with security researchers. Our Ken Delanian's got more on that.
Spies for hire lurking on Facebook and Instagram. A new report by Facebook's parent company Meta names 7 organizations as part of what it calls the global surveillance for hire industry, accusing the companies of tricking people into giving up their private data and handing it to authoritarian governments, corporations, and anyone with an enemy who can pay the fee. Their alleged targets? Journalists, human rights activists, even political opponents.
Why should our viewers be concerned about this?
These firms are engaging in indiscriminate targeting journalists, politicians, political activists, and everyday people around the world. And what this industry does is it democratizes snooping. It democratizes spying, and it means that far more people have access to these tools than ever before.
Meta's head of security policy, Nathaniel Gleischer, says almost anyone can be a victim of the unregulated private spying industry. Once the spies earn their target's trust by friending them on Facebook, they often send them malware that can secretly take over their phones. That's what Facebook alleges happened with an Israeli firm called NSO Group, which has been blacklisted by the U.S. government over allegations that its Pegasus software has been used to target journalists and activists. NSO disputes the allegations. According to Meta's reports, many firms deploy surveillance software that quietly infects smartphones and can turn on cameras, microphones, and location services without the user knowing.
Once you own somebody's phone, you essentially have the next best thing to access to their mind.
Eva Galperin is the director of cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation and an expert on digital surveillance.
And since we take our phones with us everywhere, you essentially have a tracking device. You have all of the passwords that somebody uses in order to log in to their various accounts from their phone. You have a list of all their contacts, who they talk to. You have all of their phone calls. You have their end-to-end encrypted messages.
Facebook sued NSO in 2019, alleging they sent spyware to 1,400 WhatsApp users. NSO denies the allegations and the lawsuit is ongoing. But today's report names other companies, including Black Cube, another Israeli firm, hired a few years ago by Harvey Weinstein to spy on journalists investigating his sex crimes, according to courtroom testimony. Now, Meta has banned the companies from their platforms. Their new report says Black Cube posed on Facebook as graduate students, human rights workers, and TV producers, all in an effort to obtain alleged victims' personal email addresses to send them hidden spyware. In a statement to NBC News, Black Cube said it doesn't undertake any phishing or hacking, and that it makes sure its actions are fully compliant with local laws. Cobwebs responded it operates only according to the law and adheres to strict standards in respect of privacy protection. The Meta report comes just weeks after the company's rebrand, amidst an onslaught of criticism and potential legal challenges related to its handling of disinformation on its platforms. Meanwhile, Meta says it notified nearly 50,000 people who were spied on across 100 countries.
It's unlikely that any of them knew that they'd been targeted by these firms across the internet.
So how do you protect yourself? Set up two-step authentications on all your accounts and be careful about accepting friend requests from strangers.
The stakes are high because the people who are being targeted are precisely the people who stand up for human rights. And these tools are being used as a way to quash that.
Ken joins us now to tell us more about this fantastic report, which, frankly, Ken, is pretty terrifying. Look, you talked in your piece about the fact that Meta is getting criticized for how the company handles disinformation on its platform. So why are they putting this report out now?
Kristen, it's absolutely fair to note that this is a convenient time for Meta to be pointing the finger at alleged bad acts by other companies when Meta itself stands accused of tolerating disinformation in pursuit of profits. But Meta sued one of these private spying firms back in 2019, long before its current PR troubles, and the company's security chief told me that this investigation began more than a year ago. So whatever its motives, Meta is winning praise from privacy groups today for naming names and banning these spies for hire from its platforms, Kristen.
So, Ken, let's talk about what happens next, right? Democratic lawmakers wrote a letter to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken about this issue just yesterday, and they say companies like NSO Group and others are, quote, complicit in human rights abuses. That's strong language for selling their technology to authoritarian foreign government customers. So what exact action do they want to see, Ken? What are they asking for here?
They want human rights sanctions against NSO Group and some of these other private spying firms. Now, the Biden administration has already blacklisted NSO and one other company, but the lawmakers want them to do more. More broadly, privacy advocates worldwide want other governments, including Israel, to strictly regulate the export of military-grade surveillance technology and to crack down on the companies that sell it to bad actors, Kristen.
Well, it's just a tremendous report, Ken. Really appreciate your joining us to talk about it live.
You bet.
Well, it's a move that only the boss could make. I'm talking about Bruce Springsteen reportedly selling his entire music catalog for a cool $500 million. We'll get into how big of a deal this is for the music industry. That's next. He's the boss. Bruce Springsteen, one of the most successful musicians of all time. Now it also looks like he's one of the savviest salesmen. He's reportedly sold his entire music and publishing catalog to Sony Music for, guess how much? $500 million, joining a list of music superstars willing to sell their tunes. Julia Borston joins us to talk about this phenomenon. Julia, great to see you. Thanks for being here. So let's start with this decision, this mega deal the boss is making. He's signing all the way to the bank on this one, but why is he giving up the rights to his music? I think a lot of people have question marks and they're raising their eyebrows about that because it seems counterintuitive to what musicians typically do.
I would say the answer is $500 million. That's the short answer. And the longer answer is that the valuations right now for these kinds of music libraries are higher than they have ever been. We've seen other deals done in the roughly 20 times range, 20 times what revenues would be generated from a library in a year. What we're talking about here for the boss, that's more like a 30 times range. So he's getting a very good price, and that's due to a couple of factors, including the popularity of streaming music. So you have all the demand from the likes of Spotify helping drive up the price. The other thing is that there could be some tax advantages for him to do this deal. So he would only pay a roughly 20% tax if he sells this content, whereas if he's getting the royalties, he would have to pay a higher tax on that. It's the sort of the tax on self-creative works is lower than taxes on royalty income. So that's a sort of a quirk of the tax code that could benefit him from doing the sale.
That's interesting. I didn't see that piece of it, and I think it's an important point to make about the taxes. And just more broadly, Julie, if we look at the entire field of musicians, The boss is not alone here. We have a number of artists who are doing this recently, including Bob Dylan, Shakira, Stevie Nicks, one of my favorites, all my favorites, I should say. What's driving this trend?
I think it's the same thing. It's the tax advantage, and that tax advantage may go away. So that's something that they're paying attention to. Better to sell it now, have lower taxes now, than have to worry about the higher taxes later. So they're trying to bake that in. And the fact that there's really not a sense of how long these valuations are going to last. So if you're towards the end of your career, you've had a very long and successful career, maybe it makes sense to get out now when the prices are at a top.
When you think about music royalties, a lot of people think about Taylor Swift. She obviously had a lot of feuds over this very issue. So how does this relate to some of the feuds that we saw play out with her?
So what's so interesting is if you look at someone like Bob Dylan, or if you look at Bruce Springsteen, I mean, Bruce Springsteen was unusual in that he really owned so many of the different rights associated with music. There are all sorts of different rights. He owned the copyrights, which makes his rights particularly valuable. So for Taylor Swift, she did not own the masters of some of her early albums. She did own the musical composition copyright. So once there was a certain amount of time that had elapsed after the albums came out, then she could re-record the album and then own those masters. So she knows that the masters are valuable. She wants to be able to one day sell her library and in the meantime make a lot of money on it. So that's why she re-recorded her compositions, took advantage of the part of this that she did own to try to create more value, create new versions of those masters that she would also own. Because ownership is valuable. That's how you have the big exits like the one we just saw from Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, it was a fascinating decision that she decided to re-record some of her music. Julia, quickly, you expecting more musicians to follow suit potentially, given the payoffs?
Well, look, yeah, this certainly seems the time to do it. You know, if you think about all of the big artists who have done these exits and the fact that a lot of musicians don't own as many of their rights as you know, the likes of Bruce Springsteen does, we are on the lookout for more. But this is the biggest one yet and could be the biggest one for quite some time.
All right. Well, what an interesting and fascinating segment. Julia Borsten, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Well, that is a wrap for this hour. My friend Megan Fitzgerald will be in the seat tomorrow for Hallie Jackson Now. Same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.